It's a story that sounds too insane to be true. How can one man without a single gun bring a struggling nation to its knees, seize a warship, and profit more than $2.4 billion? The activist investor Paul Singer of Elliott Management pulled this off, and in this video, I will attempt to answer whether he's the most evil man on Wall Street. But first, don't let the name activist investor deceive you. These men are not benevolent investors hoping to change the world for better. They're a collection of some of the most cutthroat and ruthless businessmen on earth, flexing their financial muscles to get the result they desire. One of the most famous examples of this is George Soros, who single-handedly broke the Bank of England when he placed massive bets against the pound in 1992, crashing the currency and pocketing £1 billion in profit. But today we're going to focus in on someone who's maybe even more controversial, branded as a raider by Amos Ganesh and the vulture lord, a bloodsucker, by former Argentine president Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. He's built a reputation as a merciless moneymaker who buys a share in companies he deems undervalued before influencing the board, investors, and insiders to take the actions he desires. But in the early 1990s he tweaked his strategy and started buying debt from sovereign nations either in or near to default, earning himself the ominous nickname the Doomsday Investor. He purchased debt from Peru, Congo and Argentina for pennies on the dollar. This video is a collection of these investments in which one hedge fund litigated countries that were already on their knees for their own financial gain. But first, let's travel to the world of bachata, asado, and the best footballer of all time. Sorry, it's true, and anyone who says otherwise has got the same ball knowledge as the average Arsenal fan.
We mustn't forget that it's been raining, so...
Right, to Argentina it is. This is the story of a battle that took 15 years, resulting in the seizure of a warship without a single shot fired. This fight began in 2001 when the long-struggling Argentinian economy buckled and its government defaulted on $80 billion worth of debt. In the aftermath, 93% of the country's creditors agreed to walk away with roughly 30% of what they owned. But the remaining holdouts, including Singer's hedge fund Elliott, refused the deal, chasing everything that they were owed. They claimed the debt-laden country, where more than half its population lived below the poverty line, could afford more than what it offered and began a long journey to get their money back, with Singer representing a board of hedge funds and pursuing the South American nation in court around the globe. In 2012, Singer took Argentina to court in the US and won, with courts deeming that assets could be seized in part of the pursuit of payment by creditors. They also won a court case in the UK, but Argentina refused to pay, declaring the decision invalid and saying that accepting the ruling would cause a cascade of payments that the country could not afford. But Singer wasn't done here. After hearing this, he took matters in his own hands and started closely tracking the assets of Argentina outside its jurisdiction. This included the presidential jet, assets held in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and even Navy vessels. As part of his strategy to put pressure on Argentina, he noticed that the large trading vessel, the Libertad, of the Argentinian Navy was docked in Ghana with 250 sailors aboard. He single-handedly convinced a court in Ghana to seize the ship and not allow it to leave until a small portion of the debt was repaid. Although this failed and the ship was released from Ghana, it sent a strong message to the Argentinian government that this issue was not going to go away. Singer and Elliott also litigated Argentina in France, Belgium, Luxembourg and Italy, continually keeping pressure on the South American country. At this point, it had been 15 years since the country had first defaulted on the debt. Public opinion had swayed in favour of putting this period of history behind them and finally settling the long-standing dispute. This resulted in New York courts mediating the resolution of the dispute, and under the terms of the settlement agreement, the holdouts were paid 75% with what they were owed, which worked out at approximately $4.4 billion, with Singer's hedge fund alone profiting $2.4 billion. Next, let's take a short journey to another South American country, one with some of the best food on earth, relics of lost civilizations, and the only place I've ever been where I received death threats. True story. Okay, to Peru we go. The 80s and 90s were a tough time in Peru. Inflation hit as high as 7,600% in 1990, thanks mostly to bad policies set in the 80s. As it ticked over to the 90s, Peruvians had just ended what's since been coined the lost decade, with GDP contracting 20%, poverty rising to 55%, and families struggling to put food on the table as a result of hyperinflation in commodities and essentials. In 1995, Singer's hedge fund Elliott Management spent $20 million on defaulted debt from Peru, And what followed was another long legal battle, with Singer and Elliott Management challenging the stricken country in court in New York, the UK and other European countries. After a long legal battle, Singer won, and it was ruled that Peru had to repay the full $58 million owed under the pari passu rule. However, this all reached a head in 2000, when the then president of Peru, Alberto Fujimori, who had been in power for 10 years, was attempting to flee the country due to allegations of corruption and human rights abuses. As he was preparing to flee, Singer confiscated his jet and offered to let him leave the country if he transferred the full £58 million owed from the country's treasury. Fujimori obliged. While Fujimori was eventually extradited from Chile to Peru to stand trial for his crimes, the actions of Singer and his hedge fund allowed him to escape justice for his many serious crimes. To name a few, Fujimori ordered a death squad to commit 2 massacres, resulting in the death of 25 people, and also organised the kidnappings of a Peruvian journalist and businessman. Finally, let's catch a flight over to Central Africa, to a country with a troubled past and a rich culture, the Republic of Congo. The Republic of the Congo has always been an impoverished country, but accumulation of factors such as weak oil markets, instability following an authoritarian takeover of the state, and questionable management of state resources in the 1980s led the Central African country to default on its debt. As you'd expect, when others saw pain and suffering, Elliott Management saw dollar signs and purchased $30 million of their government bonds, mostly on the secondary market, again for pennies on the dollar. In the time since, Singer has sued the country in North American, European and Asian courts, aiming to enforce payment of its debt obligations to the hedge fund, and unsurprisingly, they've been successful. In 2002 and 2003, a British court awarded Elliott more than $100 million for these debts, with the hedge fund so far being able to seize $39 million of the country's oil revenues for this partial payment. Think of how useful that $39 million could be in bettering the lives of these people. Singer's faced criticism for his investment strategies constantly throughout the years, being named as a vulture, and it's easy to see why. When nations are on their knees spiralling, he purchases debt for pennies on the dollar and begins a long process of litigating them into submission. He defends this model, saying it's a fight against the charlatans who refuse to play by the market's rules. While it's no doubt effective, his policy of becoming a holdout and refusing to play ball for any debt restructuring has made the already desperate situations of impoverished countries tangibly worse. To illustrate the impact vulture funds have on countries, listen to what the Liberian diplomat Winston Tubman said he would like to say to them.
I would say to them, do you know you're causing babies to die all over Liberia? Do you know you are making it almost impossible for this country to get back on its feet?
Vulture funds like Elliott Management operate by preying on countries that are in a state of chaos. When they are in turmoil, they buy their debt, and once they're stable again, they return and demand payment in full. While the world has thankfully moved into a position of forgiving the debt of desperately impoverished countries, funds like Elliott Management have ignored the pleas of the IMF and World Bank and have continued to pick at the carcass of countries. They've even drawn the condemnation of their countrymen, with Bush-era US Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson saying, "I deplore what the vulture funds are doing." There's no doubt that Singer is an investment genius. His returns outlined in this video confirm this. But can we describe anyone who keeps the crushing boot of debt on the neck of the world's poorest and facilitates the escape of a mass murderer anything other than evil? I don't think so. Thank you for watching. Please, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe. It really does help me out. And I'm also working on a wild video that you don't want to miss next. Until next time, peace.